Good afternoon. Welcome to today's seminar, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing a function that is new and unique to MySys SPM called the labor tracker. All right, so basically let's talk about what this program does first, okay? What this allows you to do is track employee time and use that time to drive the allocation of labor resources and associate that allocation with MOs or jobs. Okay, it can be used with the basic functionality by tracking labor to a job ID. Once you have manufacturing orders, you can actually associate labor usage with MOs. Now, remember we talked about advanced shop floor control. Okay. Once you have shop floor control, you can also use the labor tracker to drive the dispense of labor resources based on time that's tracked through the labor tracker. And it actually gets associated with an operation. Okay, we'll talk more about this later, but if you find yourself in the situation where a client is interested in using the labor tracker and they happen to have shop floor control, you'll find that you're actually going to remove your labor work center resources from those work centers. The labor is actually going to get tracked through their labor tracker. Okay, and we'll kind of get a feel for how that flow would work once we get into the demo here in a little bit. But you'd actually remove those labor resources from the work centers because everything's going to be driven from the labor tracker. Okay, and that's important because you wouldn't necessarily, those of you who have implemented Level 3 before in SAE, remember that all those work center resources got driven by the shop ops time, right? And that's still true if they're not using the labor tracker. Once this comes in, it would be redundant to keep those in there, so you would actually remove those. All right, and it's going to make more sense as we get into this. Okay, so let's talk about the labor tracker administration module. Now, I'm already logged in, but I'll show you what it looks like first of all. When you install this on your system, you're going to have two icons called MySys SPM Labor Tracker Admin and Labor Tracker. Okay, now the admin module gets its own login. Okay, so literally when you bring up the admin, and here I'll actually log out so that we can see what it looks like. When you bring up the login form, it asks you for a password. So what you do, and in many cases it makes the most sense, you could use an existing user ID and just have that user log in to the labor tracker. However, it's a good idea, and I would actually suggest that you do this, create a user ID for the labor tracker. So in my case, I literally went into MySys SPM. Okay, so I'm back in SPM, which we've been looking at throughout these seminars. I went into administration, I went to users, and I created a user called LT for labor tracker. I gave it a password of LT, but in their case, they might give this password just to the supervisor, okay, who's going to be approving all these time entries, all right? So they would use that to log into the labor tracker, right? Up here is where you designate the user ID and password, and that's what gets used to log in. So I literally enter my labor tracker user and password up here under the connection settings. Okay. The company ID is the company ID that this labor tracker is going to link to when we look to dispense resources, when we look to grab manufacturing order information, when we look to post up for job transactions. Okay, so this would be, in a live situation, the end user's company database. Okay, so whatever it's called, you put that in here. All right, now we need to know how to connect. Okay, so similar to the client, the connection string is based on whatever the URL is that the clients would use to connect to the database. So can you have this on a remote machine? Sure. It's just going to reference the URL that all the other SPM clients use when they connect to the server. So right now I'm running everything locally off my machine, so it says localhost. However, if this were on a different machine and the company database were on a server, I would leave this exactly as it is and simply replace localhost with the server name. Okay, and if I ever forgot this, I could always go to one of their machines that's actually running the SBM client, click Edit Server Connection from the login screen, and it would give me the URL I need. Okay, and that's how we're going to connect to the database. Okay, so we've got user ID specific to Labor Tracker, company, and the URL. All right, so based on this configuration you probably already put together, this does consume one of the user licenses. Okay, so certainly they don't have to buy an extra one just for the Labor Tracker. However, if they're going to be doing a lot of processing through here and they think that they'll have maxed out users and they're going to constantly be hitting it, it may be worthwhile for them to get another user license. If they find that, you know, hey, I try to go in and connect and I said, and I'll get a message saying exceeds maximum user licenses, and that happens pretty frequently, rather than having to go get someone to log out of MySys so I can process my Labor Tracker information, I may want to get another user license. All right, but they can use the ones they have. That's fine. So what does connecting do? Well, it literally goes out, visits the database, and gets all the information that the Labor Track needs. So what we're talking about here are MOs, jobs, and specific resources that you flagged as labor items. Okay, and I'll show you that in just a moment. All right, but we're getting that information saying connection made, we're okay, we are now disconnected. So it doesn't necessarily take a long time all the time. However, we are going to connect to that database. All right, now this setting here is always connect before tracking. So obviously that means whenever we log in, we're going to connect up to the database. Okay, so let's talk about the employee section. All right, now this is where you're going to create employees. Okay, so over here you'll notice add, delete. Obviously this is for QuickBooks. QuickBooks happens to have employee database, so you can import those in from QuickBooks, but that's specific to QuickBooks. So we'll click add, okay, and it says add employee. All right, so we're going to add Jim. We'll give him an employee ID of 111, okay. So what do these mean? Like the name is literally a name. So you'd put that employee's name in here. Employee ID, they might have an ID that is specific to that employee. You put that in here. Click OK. All right, so this opens up the other columns. Okay, so let's talk about those for a minute. So the name and ID get pulled in, okay, based on what you entered in there. If you need to adjust those, you just double-click. You can change them. All right, so the standard labor item, okay, this is what happened when we connected to the database. It went out to MySys, to company Doug1, and it grabbed any of the labor items that I've selected. Now, does that mean that I'm talking about an item number that I happen to type in and call labor? Obviously not. I mean, we're not going to differentiate an item ID from some other classification, okay? So what we have, I'm going to jump into SBM here real quick. In Master Files Items, okay, we'll go down to our labor items. Okay, bring up one of these. Okay, A, B, C, and D. They look just like the ones we brought in. Okay, but it's not based off of item ID. It's not even based off of item type. It's based off this checkbox right here next to the item type. Is flagging this item as labor. Okay. Now what this makes it is this makes this item available in the labor tracker. Okay, so for example, if I deselect this, okay, save that, all right, and I go back into the labor tracker, reconnect, okay, I now have a flag that appears because I've set labor A to be linked up with user Jim. Okay, so what's happened here, if you mouse over it, it says invalid standard labor item. Okay, now obviously you're not going to be able to put those in cases where they don't show up in the drop-down. Okay, so if it's already selected, that means somebody toggled that flag off and it was set previously. So in theory, they could have created a new labor item to reflect a new labor rate. However, that will be the indicator. All right, so I'll go back in here, reselect it, save. Okay, we'll close that up, reconnect, and we'll see that labor type A is now back to being available. Okay, so that's how that works. Now the standard labor item, okay, is what's going to be used for dispensing purposes when we post time entries from the labor tracker, okay, up to our MISIS company. All right, so that standard labor item is what's going to be used for that. Okay. Now the overtime labor item might be a different rate, okay, than the standard labor. Now typically it would be. That's why it's overtime. You can set this here. All right, and as we're going to see in a little bit here, the overtime labor can get hit once they exceed whatever hours you set. So, let's take an 8-hour workday, for example. We have the ability here to set our overtime hours to be 8. And then if they happen to work over 8, we can then attribute any of that extra time to use the overtime labor item rather than just one. Okay, rather than just the standard one. Okay, and we'll see that. Now, the other selection you have here is any. And as we'll see, what any allows you to do is when this employee is affected by time, okay, or has a time entry, you actually have to choose which labor item this employee is using. All right, so for our example, we're going to keep it at standard with a set labor item. Overtime we'll leave at any, okay? And the location also has a drop-down. All right, now similar to these, it's grabbing the location ID from the MISIS database, and it's allowing you to select which one this employee is going to be functioning at or processing at. Okay? Now, if employee is going to be locked in at one location, obviously you select this location here, and then any of his time entries are going to be reflected at this load. That then translates into when we post those time entries, the labor gets dispensed at this location. You're starting to get the idea here, right? If they aren't using, say, warehouses that have their own address, but maybe they have locations set up for different areas in the same building, you could choose any, right? If they happen to float from location to location, processing different operations and things like that, leave it at any. Then you can choose the location for a given time entry. That then controls the dispense of the resource. Okay? All right, so we'll say our guy stays at Loc 1. All right? Allow overtime override. Okay? The labor tracker that we'll see here in a few moments is actually a timer. And on that timer, there's a button. Selecting this, then the button says overtime. Selecting this toggle is going to make it so that that employee can turn on their overtime. So literally, they'd be able to go to their little time tracker, click on the overtime button, and it would start tracking time based on overtime. Okay, and that gets classified as such, as a time entry, and we'll see that again in a little bit. The overtime after, okay, is saying, I want you to use overtime after this many hours. Okay, so we'll leave ours at 8. Makes sense. All right, so there's Jim. So we'll add another employee just so we have one. Call this. We'll give him an employee ID of 2. Okay, and we'll do the same. Labor A, say location, we'll go loc 2, use overtime after 8 hours. Okay, we're going to save that. So we've now got some employees in here. Okay. All right. So the last part I want to talk about this, we're going to get to preferences later, is the Labor Tracker data folder. Okay. Now, the data in the Labor Tracker is stored in an XML file. Okay, that's its database. So by default, it's going to give you a Labor Tracker data folder based on wherever you installed it. Okay, so the default install path, program files, MySys, SPM, SPM Labor Tracker 1.1. So within there is a file that's called trackerdata.xml. All right, and that's what contains all the data that you'll process in the Labor Tracker. So it's a good idea to create a folder up on the network somewhere that's going to get backed up. You know what I'm saying? If you have it local, a lot of local machines, if this wasn't the server, would not be getting backed up. You can point this and put that file wherever you want. So you could create a folder called Labor Tracker up on your server and then have that XML file stored there. Okay, and then as you install this on different PCs, you just point the Labor Tracker data folder, okay, to the same directory, and that's where that stuff gets saved. Okay. All right, we'll talk about preferences in a bit. All right, so let's talk about the tracking tab. All right, this tracking tab is identical to what it will look like when someone out on the shop floor or on a client PC opens up the Labor Tracker. Okay, this is the only tab they'll have access to for the most part. Okay, so we've got our company ID up here and then an MO drop-down. Okay, when you click that MO drop-down, what you're going to see is a list of all the released manufacturing orders that are in this database. Okay, so we'll say we're going to select test no route. Okay, that's our MO that does not have a route defined for it. Okay, now, if that MO had a job number referenced on it, you would not select the job number from here. Why? Because by default, when that labor item gets processed, it's going to get put onto this manufacturing order, and therefore going to get attributed with that job ID anyway. The job number selection is if you were going to specifically select a job without an MO. So if you choose a job, you'll notice the MO goes away. All right, so if the MO is associated with a job, you don't have to select that here. Okay, that's automatically going to happen once the labor gets dispensed on that MO. So we're just going to select our MO, select our employee, location defaulted to the loc we set up for this employee. The labor is linked to the labor we associated with this employee. And there's an overtime labor resource, which is not, because we left it at any. Okay? If we had left our standard labor resource at any, we'd have this drop-down available. Okay? So we're going to select our labor, our overtime labor, and now we've got our MO configured. What does this reflect? This reflects the fact that employee Jim is going out onto the shop floor and he's going to start processing MO test no route. Okay, here's his labor information. He's going out to the shop floor. We now click the track button. Okay, so when I click the track button, I get a timer that's come up here. Okay, Jim is the employee. I have a start button, which will start the timer, and a comment button, okay, which will allow me to type in a comment should I need to. Okay, you get the MO referenced here, okay, and a done button. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click it, and the timer starts. Okay, so you see one grayed out button here, which is overtime. That's the overtime override which would be available if I had toggled that selection on the Employees tab. Okay, so I start this up. It's going to tick away. All right, now we're in the admin function right now. Okay, so how would this work in a situation where you'd have the admin or someone logging into the admin function doing this? There are probably any number of ways you would use this, okay? But one of them might be, hey, you know what? I don't necessarily want or have the availability of a machine out on the shop floor. I don't want this program installed on all kinds of clients. I have a supervisor, though, that people will check in with before they go out on the shop floor. So maybe the supervisor has this installed. She comes into the tracking tab and starts timers up. She has a whole list of employees. She selects different MOs, right? Maybe a job. She'll select the other employee, right? Start a timer up on him, okay, because maybe he's working on this job. So I'll start a timer up on him, click track, then I'll have Bill's timer up here, and it's running down. As they get done, they come up, say, hey, I'm done working on that MO. I'm switching up to this MO. So what I do is click done, okay? And then I start up the next MO for Jim. Okay, and I start that up. All right? You wouldn't necessarily use this from the admin function if you had work to do within it, because launching a timer from the tracking tab of the Labor Tracker admin makes it so that you can't go to other forms. All right, but I'm showing this to you for an example. Right? It's certainly something you can do. All right. So we're going to cover the tracking more once we look at the Labor Tracker. Okay, so let's do that right now. So let's minimize this and go and look at the Labor Tracker. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. This is the Labor Tracker right here. So let's say they do have a machine out by the shop floor. They come up with a machine that is going to handle labor tracking. All right? They have a supervisor that has the admin login and password, and that's great. That supervisor is going to do all the processing of the time entries. But they have a machine out there that they want their normal employees to be able to start these timers up on. Okay? So what you could have happen here is test new route, job 2, or excuse me, we'll go with test new route. Select Jim, overtime resource, start his timer. Okay, we get another timer going. So then Bill might come up because now it's his turn. So he's saying, well, I'm working on M22. Job. Okay, so Bill, Labor C, click track. Okay, so now Bill's got his timer going. All right, so I now have 2 timers going. And you could have as many employees out there processing as you wanted. You could have a whole slew of clocks running, tracking time, okay, for all the employees that they're working. When they're done, they come back in and click done. Or if they're taking a break, they click stop. Okay, and they start it back up when they're ready to start it back up. Okay, and these clocks will continue running. All right, so let's click done here on these. They've run for a little while. Okay, jump back into the admin. So my employees are done working. Obviously, we can't get into hours here, but for the purposes of this demonstration, it should work okay. So we've jumped now back into the admin function. All right, I see my 3 tabs up here. Go to the timesheet. All right, and actually, just for the purposes of, I'm going to switch this to Loc 1 just to make Bill play a little nicer with the information I'm working. Some of you people who were noticing that Bill didn't show up, I had the wrong location selected for him, so he was locked into a different location, which is the labor tracker being smart about things, saying that MO is not being processed at Bill's location, which is why he shows up at job. So it should play a little bit nicer now. But all right, so let's talk about the timesheet tab. All right, now this is a supervisory function right here. Okay. All right, so on the timesheet tab, the first section we're going to talk about here is the employee log. Okay. As these clocks stop, okay, and get updated, what you're going to find is time entries show up. All right. Now, right here, both of these entries show recorded hours of 0.25. All right. Now, those of you who are paying attention to those clocks, our clocks ran for a minute in some cases, 10 seconds in others. If you don't run for a minute, okay, what you're going to find is it's a mistake. You know, the labor tracker is not going to assume any time because who's really working for a matter of seconds. Once you go over a minute, though, you then kick into the minimum fractional hours, okay, which is a preference down here. And all that means is, hey, if somebody is out processing on the shop floor, set your minimum fractional hours that you want us to use, because if they're in there for 10 minutes or they're in there for 2 minutes, if you want us to go to 5 minutes, whatever. You can work with that dynamically. You can go up or down. If you want it exact, set it to all zeros, okay? But you can go and set that however you'd like, whatever makes sense. All right, but what we had it set to is a quarter of an hour. So each of those time entries rounded up to the quarter hour, and we see that listed here, okay? Now, by default, they come in with a status of submitted, right? And that simply means they haven't been approved yet. This is driven by the timer that we just clicked done on, okay? So as soon as one of those employees clicks done, it writes an entry up to this timesheet. All right, so let's look at some of these fields. Status, employees pulled from that employee section, as is the Loc. Okay, the labor is what we designated for this employee. Okay, overtime is not toggled. Okay, however, if we had flagged that enable overtime switch and the employee had flagged that timer as overtime, it would be. Okay, the start date is reflecting today's date, start time, and the recorded hours. Okay, over to the right, we get the MO that was being processed. Okay, and if there was an operation, it would reference that up. If we had plugged a comment in from our timer, for instance, 20 minutes spent on break, whatever, I could put that in the comment. Okay, so the idea with the supervisor might be, they come in here and look at these time entries. They verify that the recorded hours make sense with what that employee actually worked. Okay, if need be, they can modify anything they need to on this tab. If I want to change the labor resource, I change it. The location might be incorrect, I can change that. Okay, start date, any of these fields are modified, can be modified. Okay, once it looks good, I can then approve these entries. So I highlight the row and click Approve Selected. Okay, it now becomes approved and gets pushed down to the posting log. Okay, now the posting log is reflecting transactions that are going to get written to the MySys database. Okay, so once you approve that time entry, we take the Loc, we take the MO, it gets put down in here. Okay, so that when you post it, it's going to write that transaction to MySys, just like as if you had dispensed that labor on the MO. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens if we post this. Okay, successfully posted one entry. Do you want to archive and clear the timesheets? Yes. Okay. That's totally cleared up, and we'll go look at MySys, pull up our manufacturing order. Okay, and we see that it has put a labor type item, okay, on this MO. Okay, it's showing 0.3 because our decimal precision is like that, but it used 0.25. Go to our history. Okay, and there's our labor. It's associated with the MO. And we've done that all based on the time that was actually logged processing this manufacturing order out on the shop floor. Okay, and this doesn't even have a route, right? This would be just with advanced production. Okay, so no longer are your labor items guesstimating, even without shop floor control, they're no longer guesstimating how much labor would be used to build a bill of material. Maybe you put that on the MO, modify the quantities. Now you use the labor tracker, and it's going to automatically push through the labor that gets consumed as the MO is being built. Okay, so if we go back to our other entry here, another one to the route. Let's make this one 1 hour. Okay, we've now modified it. Well, I know actually Jim didn't start his clock when he was supposed to, right? And he only got the last 15 minutes. I can verify that. I'm the supervisor. I've changed it. I'm going to approve that and then post it. Okay, clear my log up. Okay, go to the MO. And now I've got 1.2. Again, we're doing the rounding here, but just to keep things simple. Okay, so 1.25. All right, so it's going to automatically update the MOs as you start posting those time entries. All right, so this is one where we're talking about an MO that has no routing details on it. So let's look at what it does with the route. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is pretend for a moment that our employees didn't remember to start their timers, okay, for example. The other ability you have from this timesheet, okay, is to manually create entries in this employee log section, all right? So let's take our MO where we have a route defined for it. I know that Jim went out and processed that manufacturing order. He was at Operation Kitting, say, all right? And I know he was there for 2 hours. I could come in here, click New Entry. He just forgot to put his timer on. So I'm going to say, all right, he was at Loc 1. His resources, labor A. Recorded hours was 2. The MO he was using, Test 01. And the operation happened to be stockroom, okay? Why do these look different? Those of you who are here for the shop floor control, remember that our routing details now do not have to be driven by numbers anymore. Okay, remember 00, 100, 200, 300, 400 to define the routing details. Now you make them meaningful operation identifiers. Okay, so my kitting operation might be done in the stockroom. My assembly operation might be done on the assembly line. Okay, grinding might be done in the machine shop. So I use the ability to use alphanumeric characters in that operation. Now I tie that in with labor tracker. Yeah, he was in the stockroom for 2 hours kitting up this MO. Okay, so I'll save this. I know I just created it. I'm going to approve selected, or I use approve all to approve them all at once if I had more than just the one. Okay, it's now in there. Stockroom operation, post it. Okay, posted my operation. Let's go take a look at what that looks like. So we go to test 01. Okay, jump to the history tab. There's our labor A. Quantity was 2. Okay, we'll drill down in here. It's linked to that operation. I've got my quantity, and I've got the associated accounting. So now, through the labor tracker, I've said, hey, I'm out in the stock room kitting for this manufacturing order. I've started my timer, right? In our example, we created it brand new. But he might start a timer. He's got that running for 2 hours while he's out in the stock room. Okay? He comes back, clicks done on the timer, and that creates that entry on the timesheet. Okay? It gets approved and then posted maybe at the end of the day. Right? And it automatically writes to the database, processes your labor based on the actual time clock. Right? Pretty cool. All right, so let's create another new entry here. And really, the reason I'm using new entry, working with minutes, and that's really all we have here, it makes more sense to use a new entry function just for a demo purpose. But, so let's create a new entry here and take a look at the next button here, compute overtime. See what that does. All right, so I'm going to put in loc 1, select labor for Jim here. Okay, he's using well, actually, we'll keep it simple here. So labor A, we'll say 10 hours. Okay. We'll go with a job this time. All right, so we'll save this. If you click compute overtime, okay, the first form you're going to get is let me know what the employee ID was. So we're going to say Jim. Give me the date for these entries that you want me to compute the overtime for. Because if you remember, back in the administration tab, one of the fields we set was overtime after hours. That's where we set the hour limit and after which we start paying overtime. So we've said Jim. That means I want you to take a look at all the entries up here for Jim for this date. Okay, we're looking at just today. But if you did these every week, you might open them up for a week. It still works daily as far as computing those hours, though. Okay, that's 8 hours in our configuration per day. Anything after would be overtime. Okay, so we're going to say compute. Okay, no predefined overtime labor because we selected any. So we're going to click the drop down and say, well, I pay labor D for overtime. Okay, select that. If there was no overtime, it would say no overtime. In this case, we applied overtime to 2 entries. We reduced standard hours from 10 to 8 and added an entry for 2 overtime hours. So watch up here now. When I click OK, what do I have? I have 2 submitted entries. This guy used to be for 10. Now it's for 8. The other one is now flagged as overtime using a different labor rate for 2 hours. So when I post this to this job, okay, labor D is going to get consumed for a quantity of 2, labor A for a quantity of 8. Okay, and that's going to hit the log. It's going to update the job information. All right, see how this is working? All right, now these are manual entries that we're making. However, it's exactly what you'd see if Jim actually went out, started his tracker, and came back 10 hours later and clicked done because he worked a long day. That entry goes into the timesheet, and the supervisor comes in the next day and sees that, compute overtime, do I have anything, generate the entries, I'm good to go. And I post these up, and they get attributed to the log, associated with any MOs they're associated with, tied to an operation, what have you. Okay, compute overtime. Delete selected. Okay, this does what you think it does. which is delete selected. So if I highlight a detail, maybe it's in mistake, maybe I don't like it, maybe it's in error, maybe I know Jim started his clock and he actually left, right, and this is a totally invalid entry, whatever. Delete selected will delete submitted status entries. Okay, once it's approved, you can't delete it through the delete selected function because it's got an entry down here in the log. You would have to use the delete all button, which deletes everything. Okay, so delete selected, I could come through, highlight the detail, and it deletes it. Okay, new entry we've seen a few times here, which brings us to export and import. Okay, export. Export will take this information and export it out to a CSV file. Okay, so I'll bring one up here and show you what it looks like. Okay, this is an example of what it looks like. All right, so if I have 5 different entries in here, okay, here's Jim, right? You got your date, time. It's all the same information that's listed up in the employee log. Okay, you could use this, okay, to facilitate an import. Maybe you have some kind of payroll system, right, or some kind of alternate method of tracking time out on the shop floor, and you still want to use the labor tracker, right, to post that time. Take an export, get the format, work that alternate method into the correct format that the labor tracker is looking for, and you can use the import function. Okay, so let's just get rid of these so you can see how that works. Okay, if I click import, okay, imports records from the file you pointed to, and these are all ready to now be posted. Right? So again, take that alternate method. Let's say you worked out a format CSV file, right? Maybe you got some kind of payroll system out there, some kind of log-in, log-out out on the shop floor that's tracking the time for you. You can use that, get it into this format, import the timesheets, approve these, right? And then post those up. Okay, and that will go through, hit the resources, tie them to the associated MOs or jobs or ops. Okay, and then you delete them out and move on to the next day. All right, so let's talk real quick. I know we're running short on time here. Let's jump back to the admin function here and talk about this last section here, which is called preferences. Okay, always show timesheet. All right, I'll show you what this does. What this allows you to do is set it up so that when normal employees go into their labor tracker, okay, because they don't have the admin login, so they're logging into the labor tracker. When they come in here, they actually have a timesheet tab. They can't modify anything on this, okay, but it allows them to reference it, okay? It's only inquiry. So how's that useful? Well, that might be useful when they stop their clock. They can, you know, it makes them feel good that they can see their approved time, that they can see the hours that it recorded. It might be correct. It might not. Maybe they need to speak to the supervisor about the times, what have you. This just opens that up. It's a toggle. You can turn it off if you like. Okay. All right. Auto-approve entries. Okay, most of you can probably figure out what that does. As the timesheet entries get plugged in here, right from the timers, they're going to automatically be jumped to a status of approved. Okay, so that's useful in situations where it's reasonable, okay, that the times that are getting logged in here are going to be good. It's saving a step for the supervisor so they don't have to go through and approve them all. Okay, if they're confident in the fact that their employees are going to start and stop times when they want or when they're supposed to, you can go ahead and set them to approved. You can still go in and you could verify the times and choose not to post these by using the delete all. It would delete them out. You could then go discuss things, right? Okay, but that's a key point. If you use approve all, or if you choose to use auto approve entries, you're not going to have the ability to edit those entries. They go right in as approved. You either have to delete them all and start over with a new entry, right, to make a correction, or you'd have to just post them, okay, or delete them. Okay, minimum fractional hours we talked about. That is what we're going to round up to based on the clock. Okay, enable overtime makes it so that overtime is active. If you don't have this selected, overtime does not apply to any of the time entries. Okay, think of it as turning off overtime. Your settings are still there. You can set them up. However, in cases where that end user doesn't pay overtime, you turn it off. Okay. Authenticated users would be very useful in a situation where you have, and we kind of talked about this scenario a little bit, in a situation where you have employees, okay, logging in through the labor tracker function and sharing a machine. Okay, you don't want employees turning off each other's timers, right? Or turning on somebody else's timer inadvertently, or stopping someone's timer. Okay, so you can turn on authenticate users. Okay, and we'll show you what this does. Okay, so I've logged in. All right, I'm going to go to, we'll use test no route. Seems to be working well for us. Don't need a job. So we're going to go Jim this time again. We'll stick with Jim. Overtime labor B. So when I click track, excuse me, helps if I probably save my change here. Bear with me just one moment. Okay. And once more. Well, actually, we'll just do job. Okay. What will happen is when you go to start your timer, you have to enter the employee ID. It's not a password, but it's the employee ID that employee uses to start their timer. Okay? And it's at every stage. Okay? Because every stage can affect how you can start and stop those timers. Okay? So I click OK. My timer starts. If I want to stop my timer, the same rules have to apply, right? Because we don't want someone else killing someone else's clock, right? So you click stop, it's going to say what's your login, your employee ID, okay? Then you can stop it. Click done, same deal, right? Got to click that. Okay, so that's what authenticate users does. Okay, it makes it so that every stage with regard to their timer, they have to verify with their employee ID. Okay, so that could be very useful when you're sharing a machine with timers. Okay, so let's just come back here and recap everything. Okay, so your administration's where you're setting up your employee database, you're defining your connection string, okay, setting your preferences, and the labor tracker folder. Okay, tracking is there, so if you have a supervisor, and this happens to be their machine, they want to drive the clocks, they can literally cycle through their employees, what they're working on, and start timers for each of their employees on one machine, right? Then they have control over everything. Just keep in mind, if you drive that through the admin, you can't jump off and on this tab, Okay, so you'd have to wait till all the timers were done before you could go process timesheets or something like that. Okay? The timesheets tab is where all the magic happens, right? This is where the entries get plugged in from those timers. They come in as submitted unless you're approving automatically. You can tweak those. You verify the times, make any adjustments as needed, compute your overtime if needed, approve them, and then you post them. And as we saw, when you post them up, they get applied to the MO, the operation, the job, whatever you've associated them with. Okay, and that's Labor Tracker 101 in an hour. I apologize for the interruption we had when our phones went down. Fortunately, they came right back up. So, but I guess we're at a point where we can take questions. So.
Good, thanks, Doug. Yeah, I think you ought to pay that telephone bill more speedily next time. At any rate, we have some questions here.
Okay.
First one, I'll take them in order presented, from Fred Dean. Can you set weekly hours instead of daily hours?
Weekly hours for overtime. That is
yeah,
a good
I think
question.
that was it. And
yeah. I would have to check on that. Fred, if you could, send me an email about that, and I'll verify that for you.
I'm pretty sure the answer is no, but thanks for verifying
Yeah,
that.
I don't think so.
Pierre says, for timesheet approvals, you can't change the job number or the MO to reallocate?
To reallocate.
Maybe it's if you know, in the approval process, whether you can change the job number or the MO number.
Yeah, here, let me just show you. You can, if it's submitted, you can change anything that has to do with it. So even if you had an entry in here for an employee that came in, let me just pull one up here. You know, if you had recorded hours of 2 and it was to a given job, and you happen to recognize either the job was incorrect or the hours were incorrect, as long as it's still submitted, you could make the change on that entry. Otherwise, you'd have to create a new entry to make the adjustment if it was already approved. But I hope that answers it. Yeah.
But once it's approved, that's it, right?
You're locked in once it's approved.
Okay,
that's
great. Stan Coomer, how would one employee on the shop floor enter 2 work orders through the timer function that he was working on at the same time? Stan, let's put that sentence back together again. Let me see. Did you follow that, Doug? Want me to read it to you again?
Well, no, I think I understand. You would only, well, using this function, you'd be processing one MO at a time.
But you can have as many timers going as you want, right?
You could, yeah. So, I mean, in this case, what you'd have to do, let's see if I can get one going here. So we'll track this. Okay, so I got that timer going. And then we'll go M18. Or actually, we'll just keep a job. So we'll go.
You know, I'd ask you to turn off authentication, but...
Yeah. Let me go back.
So how about creating Gym 1, Gym 2? That would do it, right?
Yeah, you'd have to go with different users. Yeah.
Okay, I think we got the answer.
Yep.
Okay, Dana Stinson, does the labor item have to exist on the MO before you can post labor to it? I like that question, Dana.
It does not, no. If the labor exists on the MO, okay, it gets posted to it. So, for instance, if we go to that test no route, okay, if you're dealing with an MO that has no routing details on it, when you post your labor to that manufacturing order, we'll actually go and check the details. If the labor item is on the material details, it will simply, as we saw here, increase the quantity that gets used on it. Okay? If it doesn't exist, it will insert a new detail for that labor item on that MO. Okay? And in the case of work centers, when you associate it with an operation, It doesn't get put on the material details, obviously. It just gets consumed and tied to that op, that MO cost, and that MO. So.
Great, thanks. I'm sure that Dana's happy about that. I remember discussing that functionality. I'm pretty happy that it worked out the way it does. That makes it great. Dave Urich, why is the tracker data in an XML file and not in the SQL database? You want to take a shot at that, Doug?
I unfortunately.
You weren't around for the design process,
no,
and I was.
No,
so.
Yeah, that wasn't me. So.
Well, okay. So here's the reason why.
Okay.
We wanted you to be able to install the labor tracker module basically on any PC that you could run Windows on, not to require a whole SQL database. And since the amount of data that you actually have to keep is rather slight compared to what's in the main database, the XML files seem to be the appropriate solution. So, Pierre, if the time capture tool, if you add a comment, up to where will the comment be available? Where does that comment go?
It goes right here in this section here. That's where the comment gets put in.
Okay. So you can read it in the timesheet.
For instance, let's say. Okay, why don't you go on to the next question, and I'll jump back to this just to show them how it works, because we got to let it take for a few minutes.
Dana, how come it didn't take into account for the other 2 hours for that day on the 12th of March? You probably would have to remember exactly what you were doing to answer that question, I suspect,
I do.
Doug. So.
Well, I think what Dana's referring to here, let me just get this timer in, is when I did the import of the 4 entries, why when I posted it did it post the 3 entries? And I'll show you that again because I have that example actually, and it'll take 2 seconds to show. Let me just click done here, see if I had long enough to get there. Yeah, I didn't let it run long enough. So I'll jump back to the comment for you, Pierre, in just a moment. Let me jump to Dana's. I'm going to import this again. And I think this is what he was asking, but date. All right, so I have my 4 here. When you, we'll just do approve all, okay? Notice how it consolidated the entries, okay? What it has done here is taken, okay, common entries for the same job at the same location, and it's consolidated the hours up. Okay, so it's not that it missed the other 2, because understand this one wasn't here before. It's not that it missed the other 2, it consolidated it in. Okay, so if you do the math, there's 17, and you've got 17 hours here. So it consolidates common entries to the same user, employee, okay, for the same job, MO, what have you. So that's
okay,
what
Doug, I'm going to take this one out of order, but it's from Dana on that subject.
Okay.
When you calculated overtime, there were 2 entries, one 2 hours and one 10 hours, and there should be 4 overtime hours in that case.
So that's what he was talking about. No, okay. Yeah. Here, I'll show you. In that case, what we had done is created a new entry. To demonstrate that, we put in 10 hours. We'll just do a job. Okay, when you click compute overtime, okay, it took the 10 hours. We'll say labor C.
2 for overtime.
It switches the 10 back to whatever your overtime after hours setting is on the administration function for that employee. Hours is set to 8. So what it does is it says, all right, well, they processed at Loc 1 for this job for 10 hours. 8 of that is at the standard rate, which is labor A. It then adjusted the other 2 down to the overtime rate. So that's where you get the 10. Does that make sense?
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Yeah.
And I would say, Dana, if you want to continue that discussion, would you be in touch with Doug directly? Thank you. Let's see. From Tony, in the timesheet, there was a second entry for 2 hours that did not enter into the time calculation. I don't know. I would say let's leave that for your exercise. You can play with that. You can you'll get the time tracker when you install the program and play with that. We'll show on time. From Eva, can you import negative hours to reduce prior recorded entries? Doug is like a dog with a bone here. He wants to show that right.
Negative
okay,
hours.
Doug. Hey, Doug. It's Friday, Doug.
Yes, it is.
You have to go home soon, Doug.
Okay, and we'll just post this up.
Yeah, Eva's already on Saturday morning, and she gets up really early.
Okay. Well, I would say that it probably does not do that. We'll take a look real quick here.
Okay, now I'll give you Doug's home phone number, okay? Just kidding. All right. Hey, Doug?
Yes.
Enough already. I know you
okay.
want to show that works, but...
Well. Yeah, no.
Good.
No dice. All right, so let me just show the comment here real quick. So, that's where it is. Okay, so you put your comment, comes right in.
Okay, terrific.
Okay.
Doug, are you ready for the next question?
Sure.
Okay. From Eva, can you import negative hours to reduce prior recorded entries?
I think she just asked that one.
Yeah, I know, but you were off doing that other thing. That's why.
Oh, I see. Yes. You can put it in there, but it won't process. So I'm not sure if that's something that's a design decision or not. So you probably
you can't have negative hours.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. From Sonia, can you use barcode scanning to print a barcoded traveler and scan the employee start, stop, time, job, etc. into the labor tracker?
Well, that would get back to the import-export function. There's no tie-in here. However, what you'd be looking at is getting something in an import format that you could import in here, providing it's in the same format we're looking for. It's all about the way the data is laid out.
So if you want to go buy yourself a symbol barcoder or something like that, you can program it to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you get it to look in, having the employee ID, loc, labor, all that, sure.
Yeah, when we were working on that, we also talked about the possibility that you own some kind of fancy-dancy time card system, a $20,000 Kronos or something like that, and that's the way you get that data in there too.
Sure.
Okay, Dana, do the imported entries come in as approved?
Well, it's a status. You can import them as approved, but it's just a field on the import. So
You have your choice.
It would depend on what you have.
Does it increase the amount of time added if it's OT by some factor like 1.5?
It doesn't. I'm guessing you're assuming or asking about the rate. No. The idea would be you would have an overtime labor resource defined, and you would select that labor resource. So when you break out the hours, you would actually come in and tell us, or have preset in your employee set here, what labor applies for the overtime for this employee. And then once overtime gets triggered, we're going to kick in and allocate that entry, that overtime entry, with the appropriate labor item.
And Dana asks a follow-up question. Is the location required even if it's the only one?
Even if it's the only one.
Yeah, I'd say it to any and not have to worry about it.
You have to have a loc ID, so in that case you'd probably have home, but yeah.
Okay, so I think that takes care of the questions now. Sounds like you and Dana might have a lively conversation at some point. Thank you, everybody. Anybody else have a question before we wrap it up for the day? This is the 8th and almost final session. Next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the opportunities to do custom reporting in MISIS SPM. And I've asked Scott Beavers, our channel manager, to drop by and talk a little bit about changes to our business partner program and how you can be involved in that. It's pretty easy. Most people are just grandfathered in there. But you have an opportunity to ask Scott any questions related to that. So, seeing no further questions, thanks very much, Doug, for another informative workshop. And we will see you next Tuesday. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.